1964, public accommodations. America, you promised. 1965, Voting Rights Act. America, you made a promise. The legacy of black folk in America is to get it to listen to itself so that we can become a nation that is as good as its promise. How do we do that? I'll take my seat in a minute. Well, how do we do it? We can't just listen, we gotta do something, right? One thing you all can do as college students is to never allow anybody to give you a fuzzy narrative of history. You gotta remember truthfully. Black History Month should be a 12-month process. That's what White History Month is, right?
Yes.
They say, why don't we have White History Month? Well, they do. They give them funny names like February, March, April, May, June, like, you know. But as we remember, truthfully, it means that we can't just remember the king that died in 68, or the king that we love now. We have to remember the king that died in 68, that was kicked out of the National Baptist Convention. We have to remember a Dr. King that was kicked off the Morehouse, wasn't allowed on the Morehouse College's Board of Trustees because they said Martin Luther King was a bad influence on young people. Said he went to jail too much. Seriously, like he was T.I. or something. We can't just remember W.E.B. Du Bois as the figure who started the Crisis magazine or organized the NAACP or the Niagara meetings. We have to remember W.E.B. Du Bois, who died an enemy of the state. When he died on August 27, 1963, he was rejected by his own people, an expatriate who was unloved. His friends wouldn't even answer the door when he knocked. The media would have you remember August 28, 1963 as the I Have a Dream speech, and they want you to remember August 28, 2008, because that's when Barack Obama became the nominee for the Democratic Party. And they'll say, oh my God, what a great story. August 28, 1963, King has a dream. August 28, 2008, Obama fulfills a dream. It's a great story. It feels good, right? But what they don't want you to remember, what you have to remember in this tradition is not just August 28, 63 or August 28, 2008. You got to remember August 28, 2005 when Katrina comes and washes away an entire community. And the nation doesn't respond. Then you got to remember August 28, 1955 when Emmett Till is murdered. And you don't just remember it so you can wallow in misery. You remember it so the next time somebody talks about Al-Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra or some other terrorist organization, you can draw on this tradition and say, no, the most consistent, effective, efficient, violent terrorist organization in this country has been the KKK. And the police. And then you draw on that tradition and you say, wait a minute, that same boy in Mississippi who was from Chicago, who was killed for nothing, is eerily reminiscent of another boy who would have turned 18 yesterday, Trayvon Martin, whose very body was seen worthy as lethal force. You got to ask different questions. You listen, you remember, but then you got to discern wisely, ask a different question. Y'all go to high schools in Brooklyn, it's a line down the street to get in, because you got to go through a metal detector, a dog, a police officer, school officer, parole officer, probation officer. We spent more money on surveillance equipment in schools than prisons in the last 5 years. It takes you 20 minutes to get into school because of all of that, and when you finally get in, ain't nobody stopping you from leaving. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why, if black people keep getting pulled over and white people are more likely to have guns and drugs in the car, why do they call it driving while black as opposed to patrolling while racist? And then after all of this happens, after being harassed and pushed and prodded and mistreated, you kids finally get to school and they give you a test, a region exam or something. Still don't know why they give you that. I've yet to see a job in the real world for a good test taker. I mean, really, I got like 10 jobs, and ain't none of them Do you go in and they say, Mark, I want you to sit at your desk. You have an hour. You can't talk to anybody. You can't get any notes. You can't work in groups. You can't use the internet. Go. And yet, they give you this test, and then when the test doesn't turn out the way they want, they say there's an achievement gap. As if the problem is y'all. Now, mind you, white people don't do as well on tests as Asian people. They just don't call it an achievement gap.
Right.
You know, they have a way of pathologizing what we do. Right? 90% of white people are killed by other white people. You never hear, white on white crime is killing America. Right? And yet, when they talk about this achievement gap, by calling it an achievement gap, they focus on the gap instead of the things that cause the gap. What if they called it a funding gap? A mentoring gap, a teaching gap, an investment gap, a building gap, a technology gap, a care gap, not even a parenting gap. But to call it an achievement gap focuses on you who bubbled in B instead of C on the region when they don't think about all the things that got you to the point where you don't know the answer to C instead of B and ignores the fact that the test don't really matter that much in the first place. Ask different questions. 40 million people, and I really gotta go off this. Over the last 40 years, in 1968, I'm gonna tell you this, and this is important. In 1968, there were 250,000 people in prison. And we said, oh my God, we are becoming a fascist nation. How could you lock up 250,000 of your own people? Family, there are now 2.5 million people incarcerated in this country. 1 in 100 Americans is incarcerated, American adults. 1 in 100. 1 in 3 black men between 20 and 29 are on parole, probation, or incarcerated. 1 in 3. We incarcerate more black people per capita than apartheid South Africa. This is our real profile. The simple answer is we raised a generation of criminals. The simple answer is we raised a generation of slow runners, right? People just don't get away from the cops like they used to. But there are more complex answers that you all have to ultimately ask, and more importantly, y'all got to fix. Over the last 40 years, we've created more things to lock people up for. We've taken medical problem of drugs and made it criminal. So that people who need help, instead of getting help, they get incarcerated. We've taken mental illness and we got rid of mental illness funding, and so people who were in mental facilities are now on the street. And then people like Giuliani made it illegal to be on the street. Public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, trespassing, loitering, panhandling. We made all this stuff illegal, so people who were once in a mental institution now on the street, they can't get drugs, so they buy illegal drugs like crack, which just magically happen up here at the same time that the people on the street. So now the only public housing we really have is prison. And so then the people who are on the street now go to prison, and they go to prison, they're vulnerable, they're abused, they still don't get mental health, and then they come out with the same problem, the same drug addiction, and they can't get a job because with the criminal record, as Michelle Alexander pointed out in her book, New Jim Crow, which y'all should read, you can't get public housing with the record, you can't get a job, you can't get education, you can't vote. So now you're a second-class citizen. That is why there are as many black people incarcerated as there were slaves in 1850. It's not a coincidence. But it's not enough to just analyze the world, family. King talked about the paralysis of analysis, where you can just analyze and just sit and analyze like we in a barbershop. You got to do more than that. Lastly, family, you got to act bravely. We come from a tradition that says we don't just think, we do. We pray while running. We continue to struggle and sacrifice and organize. That means that every single one of you should join an organization. You should work with an organization. You should build with an organization right now. We need plenty of money from the government. We need all the rights we're entitled to as citizens, but that doesn't stop you from making a difference in your world right now. There are drugs in your neighborhood, but you don't got to sell them. You damn sure ain't got to smoke them. Your schools have old books sometimes, but you have to still read them. Some of you have children, but you still must raise them. There is a responsibility that we all have that comes from this tradition. We must organize, we must fight, and we must be willing to imagine a world that is not yet. And that's what Harriet Tubman brings to us. I always like to end with Harriet Tubman because she was such a powerful black woman. And she represents a whole tradition of black women who often get ignored in history because there's a black man standing in front. The challenge of your generation more than any other generation is to elevate the role of black women so we understand that black women is not just supposed to be behind us, but leading. That the black woman has to be a powerful voice. And Harriet Tubman had that powerful voice. And I want every single one of y'all, I don't care if you're male, female, young, old, I want all of y'all to become Harriet Tubmans who are willing to usher us into a new level of freedom, because that's what Harriet did. She would literally go to slaves. She said, I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they had known they were slaves. Convincing them that the world can be better. You all in the same place. Yes, we got a black president, but the world can still be better. The slaves say, wait a minute, what's better than the house? What's better than this plantation? What's better than the world that I have around me? She had to convince them that another world was possible, that more freedom is possible, that whether you're gay or lesbian or homeless or poor or disabled, there's another world that's possible. She would convince them that another world was possible when black people would sing songs like "A Steal Away" or "Glory Gonna Come in the Morning." It wasn't just a gospel song, it was a message. When she said "Glory Gonna Come in the Morning," she was saying, tomorrow morning, be by the tree. We out. And that next morning, she would convince those Negroes to go to the tree, and they would start to walk through the woods, and they would start to move toward freedom. And sometimes, some of those Negroes would get scared. Just like now, people are saying, oh my God, we got a black president, we got black CEOs, I don't think any better, I'm going back here. And she would have to convince them to keep fighting through the woods, even when times are hard, even when our schools are crumbling, even when our neighborhoods are fractured, even when our parents are in jail. The word can get better. We have to keep walking through those woods. And sometimes they would turn around and say, I just can't do it. And Harry would say, okay, go back. And as soon as they go back, she'd pull out the shotgun. And she'd knock them on the back of their head. Sometimes we have to literally knock people on the back of their head and convince them that the world can be better and make them get something that they don't even know they want. Convince them that the world can be better. Convince them that it's something they need. She was in this little black woman, 5 feet tall, would drag these 6'8" scary Negroes all the way through the woods, and they'd wake up in Massachusetts wearing